Welcome back to the deep dive. It's Sunday, February 22nd, 2026.
Good to be here.
Yeah, we're in week 8 of our structural log. And I want to start this deep dive by pointing out something that I think we've all been sensing, but maybe just haven't had the language to describe until now. Because you look at the headlines, right? You look at the high-level numbers, the GDP, the market indices, the AI deployment stats, and they're all just moving up and to the right. The machine looks like it's running perfectly.
Right. On paper, the dashboard is completely green.
Exactly.
Right.
But then you close that dashboard and you look at the actual texture of daily life. The grocery bill, the mood at the local coffee shop, even just the speed at which your local city council fixes a pothole.
Yeah.
And it feels like everything is grinding. It just feels heavy.
Well, that dissonance you're feeling, that is actually the core theme for this week.
Okay.
Usually when we look at the news, we're trained to look for the boom. We look for the rupture, the crash, the riot, the thing that explicitly breaks.
But the sources we're looking at this week are telling a really different story. They're basically saying, stop looking for the explosion.
Exactly.
The real story of 2026 isn't a rupture. It's this concept called silent shear. And honestly, once you understand what shear means in this context, it completely changes how you see the world right now.
It really does. And to understand silent shear, you have to kind of think about physics for a second.
Okay, lay it on me.
So shear stress happens when two parts of a material are sliding past each other in opposite directions, or, and this is the key for this week, they're sliding at drastically different speeds.
Drastically different speeds. That's the hook here.
That's the entire thesis. We are looking at a structural environment where the high-speed systems, so finance, AI, capital allocation, geopolitical maneuvering, they're accelerating. They're moving at a velocity that is, frankly, breathtaking.
Yeah.
But the social layers, the institutions, the laws, the households, they're moving much, much slower.
So you have the top layer of the world basically going Mach 10. And the layer underneath it is doing a leisurely stroll. And that friction between them, that's the shear.
Precisely. And why this matters specifically right now in week 8 is that we are in a period without a visible crisis.
Right. There's no massive riot on the front page today.
No market collapse. But silence doesn't mean peace. In structural terms, silence often means pressure is building. It means the friction is accumulating because the movement hasn't stopped. It's just not breaking anything yet.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yep.
Because this isn't just a vibe, right? The sources provide a really rigorous framework to analyze this. They call it the three-layer structural lens. It's almost like an MRI of the global system.
It really is a great way to slice through the complexity so we can actually see where the friction is coming from.
So how does it break down?
We have 3 distinct layers we need to track. First, up at the top, you have the OS layer, the operational system. That's the high-speed machinery.
Got it.
Second, in the middle, you have the institutional layer. That's the adjustment mechanism, so governments, laws, regulators.
Okay.
And third, at the very bottom, is the life layer. That's the household reality. That's where you and I actually live.
So OS, institutional, and life.
Exactly.
We're going to walk through these one by one to see where the shear is actually generating heat. Let's start at the very top, the OS layer. And I assume we're not talking about Windows or Linux here.
No, not exactly, though the metaphor of an operating system is actually perfect. When we talk about the OS layer in this structural log, we're talking about the systems that run the logic of the world economy.
Okay.
So global markets, algorithmic capital allocation, supply chains, military positioning.
And the defining characteristic of this layer is just velocity.
Speed is the only metric that really matters here. This layer operates on a very high frequency. These systems think in daily or weekly cycles, sometimes millisecond cycles if we're talking about AI trading or automated logistics. If you look at the velocity analysis for week 8, this layer is just humming. It's efficient, it's ruthless, and it is incredibly fast.
What specifically is moving that fast right now? Because just saying markets is a bit vague.
Sure. The sources highlight 3 specific engines. First is AI capital. There is a continued, just massive concentration of resources pouring into AI deployment.
Right.
And we aren't just talking about chatbots here. We're talking about capital being reallocated to build out massive data centers, energy grids, autonomous systems. It's moving massively, and it's moving instantly.
It's like a magnet pulling all the iron filings of the economy toward it.
That's a great image, yeah.
Yeah.
Second is financial flows. Money is reallocating rapidly across the globe to find the best yield or the safest harbor. It doesn't care about borders, it just moves.
And the third.
Third is supply chains. Strategic repositioning is happening fast. Companies and countries are moving their chess pieces constantly. Friendshoring, nearshoring, stockpiling critical minerals.
So if you were looking at the world purely from this OS layer, you'd say everything is great. The machine is dynamic, it's responsive, it's optimizing.
Exactly. The machinery is working incredibly efficiently. But here is the catch, and this is the vital distinction the expert analysis makes.
Right.
In the short term, this looks like operational continuity. It looks like business as usual. But in the long term, what's actually happening is a structural reallocation of economic gravity.
Meaning what, exactly?
The machine is moving the entire center of gravity of the world economy, but the people underneath it aren't moving.
It's like the machine moves all the furniture while you're still trying to sit on the couch.
That is exactly it. And that brings us to the mismatch. Because that high-speed machine is sitting on top of something much, much slower.
Right. Which brings us to the middle layer. Let's move down to the structural adjustment layer, the institutional layer.
Yeah, the middle management of reality. Governments, policy, regulations, international agreements.
This is where we start to really see the friction, right?
Definitely. The institutional layer is built on a completely different time frame. I mean, think about how fast a law gets passed compared to how fast $1 billion moves across a fiber optic cable.
Yeah, one takes a literal click, and the other takes what? A committee hearing, 3 readings, a vote, a veto, a judicial review.
Decades sometimes. Institutions operate on budget calendars. They operate on political timelines, 2 years, 4 years. There is an inherent inertia built into them, and the sources call this a compatibility error.
Compatibility error. It sounds like when I try to run a brand new game on an old laptop, it just stutters and freezes.
It's the perfect metaphor. You have software, the global economy running on hardware, are institutions that simply cannot keep up with the processing speed.
And how does that actually show up in the real world?
We see it in what they call policy lag versus capital mobility. Money moves instantly, laws move annually. By the time the regulation is finally written and passed, the capital has already moved 3 times to a different sector or a different country.
The sources also mentioned a specific type of friction here called security rationality versus domestic cost pressure. That's a bit of a mouthful, but let's unpack it because it feels really important.
It's crucial for understanding the gradient we're on. Think about it this way. At the high level, the OS level, it makes perfect sense for a country to shift its supply chains for national security.
Like saying, hey, let's build microchips here instead of overseas.
Exactly. Or let's put up a tariff to protect this specific strategic industry. Strategically, to the OS, it's totally rational.
It's the smart move on the chessboard.
Right. But domestically, down at the institutional and life layers, that move creates immediate friction. It raises costs.
Yeah.
It disrupts local businesses that relied on the old, cheaper supply chain. It changes the price of everyday goods. The security logic of the OS clashes directly with the economic reality of the local institution.
So this middle layer, the institutional layer, is theoretically supposed to be the shock absorber. It's supposed to take those high-speed changes from the OS and smooth them out so they don't crush the people at the bottom.
That is its structural function, yes. It converts high-speed change into livable reality. But the analysis for this week suggests this layer is struggling. It's experiencing adjustment delay. It is failing to convert that external pressure from the OS layer into internal adaptation fast enough. The shock absorbers are stiff. They aren't compressing.
And when the shock absorbers don't work, the passenger feels every single bump. Which leads us to the third layer, the life layer. The sources sometimes call it the N layer or narrative layer, but really it's just the household.
Yeah, this is the social membrane. This is where we buy groceries, pay rent, and try to plan our futures. And this is where the observation for week 8 gets really fascinating.
Oh, so?
Because if the shock absorbers are failing and all this pressure is coming down from the top, you would expect a lot of noise. You'd expect shouting, right?
But the sources say it's quiet.
It is remarkably quiet. There are no massive upheavals recorded in the data for this week, no widespread riots. And this brings us to a critical structural concept, calcification.
Calcification.
Yes.
Like a hardening of the arteries.
Yes, exactly. The reaction is muted not because everything is fine, but because the layer is hardening just to survive.
Wow.
The sources list the anchors of this calcification. First is household cost absorption. People are just eating the extra costs. They aren't going out to protest. They are just quietly cutting back on discretionary spending.
Right. Or working more hours, taking on a side gig.
Exactly. Another anchor is limited wage acceleration. Wages aren't spiking to match the pressure in many sectors. And then there's selective market responses. The sources call this entire state silent durability mode.
Silent durability mode. That sounds, I mean, that just sounds exhausting.
It is. It's a state of deep endurance.
Yeah.
And we have to make a really critical distinction here, which the sources highlight. Silence does not equal stability.
That's a huge point. Just because I'm not screaming doesn't mean I'm not in pain.
Exactly. The silence represents distributed stress internalization. Instead of the system breaking at a macro level, the individual units, the families, the small businesses are absorbing the stress. They are taking on the load personally.
The report talks about trust elasticity here, that the pressure hasn't disappeared, it's just been transferred onto the trust elasticity of the middle class and the households.
Think of trust as a rubber band. The OS layer is pulling one end of it at 100 miles an hour. The institutions are stuck in the middle, slipping, and the household is holding the other end.
Yeah.
The rubber band hasn't snapped. That would be a rupture. But it is being stretched thinner and thinner. That stretch, that's the shear. The pressure is being held by the people.
So, okay, let's step back and look at the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Connecting these dots across the deep structural layer, the sources give us this synthesis formula. Geopolitics times capital allocation times institutional speed times household elasticity.
Right, it's a gradient analysis. And when we synthesize this, we see a distinct pattern. The source material refers to a structural score pattern, specifically the JP elastic pattern.
Now, JP usually refers to Japan, but the sources aren't talking about the country itself here, are they? They're using it as a structural archetype.
Exactly. They are using the structural pattern often associated with Japan's economy. So high stability, high debt, aging demographics, low growth as a structural model for what we're seeing globally.
Yeah.
It's a way to score the layers.
Let's break down that score then.
Yeah.
How is the world grading right now under this lens?
So for the upper layer, the OS, the score is roughly a 2 out of 3. It's functioning well, it has high speed, high retention of value, it's doing its job of allocating capital efficiently.
Okay, so the machine gets a passing grade, and the lower layers.
The middle and lower layers, so institutions and life, are scoring a 1 out of 3, low elasticity, high hardening. They are really struggling to adapt.
So you add that up, a total score of roughly 4 out of 9. That doesn't sound great. It sounds like a system that is barely passing.
It's not a failing grade in the sense that the machine has stopped. A 0 would be a total collapse. A 4 out of 9 means the system isn't broken, but the conversion performance is incredibly low.
Right.
The efficiency of the top simply isn't translating to the well-being of the bottom.
This feels like a very precarious position to be in. How does this actually play out over time if we look at the short term versus the long term?
In the short term, the system appears stable. Because of that calcification, that hardening we talked about, things hold together. The silent durability mode works for a while.
But in the medium term?
In the medium term, the institutional conversion capacity becomes the deciding factor.
Meaning, can the government grease the gears?
Yes. Can they soften the blow? Can regulations catch up to AI capital deployment before it totally disrupts labor? That's the medium-term question.
And the long term?
The long-term pivots entirely on that trust elasticity at the life layer. How long can households stay in silent durability mode before the rubber band actually snaps?
The sources use gradient language here, which I think is a great way to frame it. They don't make explicit predictions, they talk about slopes.
Yes, and that's really important for our structural log. We avoid alarmism. We just look at the slope.
Yeah.
The gradient currently leans toward continued shear. The incentives, where the money is, where the strategic power is, they are tilting the machine to go faster. They are not tilting towards slowing down to let society catch up. The incentives begin to tilt, but they aren't toppling the system.
I want to pause here and ask the question that I think is haunting this whole analysis.
Yeah.
This brings us to the structural inertia layer of our discussion.
Sure.
If there is so much pressure, if the rubber band is stretched this ridiculously tight quantity, why haven't we seen a rupture? Why hasn't something snapped yet?
It's the big question. Why no boom? Why no crash? The expert consensus in the sources points to several anchors of inertia. These are basically the forces holding things together, gluing the cracks in real time.
What are they?
First is delayed price pass-through. This is huge. Even though costs are rising rapidly at the top, energy, insurance, raw materials, they haven't fully hit the consumer in every sector yet.
There's a lag.
Exactly. Companies are eating some of it to keep their market share. Supply chains are buffering it with old inventory.
So the full bill just hasn't arrived at the kitchen table yet. We're still in the grace period.
In a way, yes. Second is political non-agenda status. This is fascinating structurally. These deep issues, velocity mismatch, algorithmic shear, they aren't really on the ballot anywhere.
Right. You turn on the news or watch a debate, and nobody is talking about institutional latency or capital velocity.
No. Political debates tend to be about culture or personalities or specific localized scandals. They aren't about the structural physics of the global economy.
Yeah.
So there's no political channel for this specific stress to explode through. If you can't vote on the core problem, you generally don't rally in the streets about it. You undo it.
That's a really powerful insight. If there's no language for it in the public square, it stays private, it stays silent.
Exactly. The third anchor is corporate internalization. Corporations are absorbing some of the stress internally by restructuring or delaying hiring rather than doing massive newsworthy layoffs all at once.
And the final one.
Finally, cultural inertia. We are just conditioned to endure. We are in an absorption phase.
The report uses a very specific word for this. Viscosity.
Yes, viscosity. Think of honey or molasses. The system is thickening. It's slowing down the reaction time. We are observing a thickening of social reality rather than a breaking of it.
It's fascinating because usually we think of resilience as a purely positive thing. Oh, the system is resilient. But here, absorption it just feels heavier. It feels like we're storing the energy of the crash inside ourselves rather than avoiding it entirely.
That is the exact risk we are tracking. Stability is not equilibrium.
Say more about that.
Equilibrium means things are balanced, the forces are equal. Stability just means it isn't falling over right now. You can have a highly stable structure that is under immense, terrifying load. We are stable, but we are absolutely not in equilibrium. The gradient is steep.
So as we look at this Week 8 report, the takeaway isn't panic, it's awareness. It's about seeing the friction for what it is.
It's about recognizing that just because the surface is calm, it doesn't mean the deep structure isn't moving violently. The OS is sprinting. The life layer is standing still, basically bracing for impact.
It really changes how you read the news. You stop looking for the explosion, and you start looking for the shear. You look for the places where things are sliding past each other too fast.
And you look at the silence differently. You realize that the silence of the household is actually a key structural variable. It's the variable keeping the whole equation from becoming chaotic.
Let's try to compress this for the listener as we wrap up. If we had to sum up this week's structural deep dive in one compression sentence.
This week's structure shows high-speed systems pressing against slower social layers.
And if we look at the direction, the directional gradient.
The slope currently leans toward continued shear, not breakage. We are sliding, not snapping.
So the big thing to watch moving forward, the forward-looking question.
The question is whether institutional conversion capacity strengthens, do the shock absorbers finally start working, or whether household absorption reaches its absolute limit.
That's the pivot point right there. So our one-sentence takeaway. Silent shear is accumulating between capital velocity and social elasticity.
That is the core reality of Week 8.
And I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over until our next deep dive. Does this remain an absorption phase, or does the gradient begin to accelerate?
That is the ultimate question.
Thanks for listening to this week's Structural Log. We'll see you next time.